The day started like any other. My mornings were a well-oiled machine. Wake up before the alarm, get dressed, brace myself for the morning traffic, and steal a few quiet moments in the car with my coffee before the madness of the workday began. Routine had always been my anchor, both in my job and in life. That's why when my wife, Jessica, casually mentioned she was going out with her friends that evening, I didn't think much of it. She did this every so often, a night out to unwind, share laughs, and catch up on life with her group of friends. But something about that day felt off. Jessica spent an unusually long time in front of the mirror, cycling through different outfits like she was preparing for something more than just a casual night out. Normally, she'd throw on jeans, a cozy sweater, and her go-to sneakers without a second thought. But today, she chose a fitted black dress, one I hadn't seen in years. That wasn't all. She applied her makeup with an almost obsessive precision, finishing with a deep red lipstick that she usually reserved for special occasions. And then, the final touch, a spritz of her most expensive perfume, one she rarely used unless it was for something important. I didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway watching as she fussed with her hair. She caught my gaze in the mirror and offered a small, almost dismissive smile, as if to reassure me. But I hadn't voiced any concerns, at least, not yet. When she finally came downstairs, I asked casually, "Girls' night again? Where to this time?" She answered without hesitation, her voice smooth, prepared. "Yeah, we're just going to that noisy little restaurant on the corner. Lisa's having a rough time since she and her husband split, so we figured she could use a night out." She gave more details than she usually did. Names. Specific problems. Anecdotes about Lisa's struggles. It all sounded reasonable, like the kind of thing she and her friends did all the time. But something about the way she said it, too smooth, too rehearsed, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then, just as she was about to leave, I noticed something on the kitchen counter. A small box, slightly open, revealing a sleek leather phone case with initials embossed on the front, RB. I frowned. The initials didn't belong to anyone I knew. A gift, maybe? For someone at work? Or was there something else I wasn't seeing? I didn't ask. Not yet. If I'd learned anything over the years, it was that asking the wrong question at the wrong time could send the truth scurrying into the shadows. So instead, I closed the box and left it where it was, making a mental note of it. Jessica left soon after, and I did what I always did. I went about my evening. Cleaned up the kitchen, organized some paperwork, answered a few emails. But no matter how much I tried to focus, my mind kept circling back to the details that didn't quite fit. The dress. The perfume. The mysterious initials. It was like trying to put together a puzzle without knowing what the final picture was supposed to be. Still, I reminded myself not to jump to conclusions. I'd never been the jealous type, never been one to accuse without evidence. I prided myself on being logical, patient. So, I forced myself to let it go. At least, until she came home. Jessica returned late, her cheeks flushed, her mood lighter than it had been when she left. "It was great," she said, a little too enthusiastically, scrolling through her phone to show me pictures of Lisa, smiling and laughing. Everything about her seemed normal, reassuring, even. But then, as she leaned in to kiss me goodnight, I caught it. A scent. Not hers. Not her expensive perfume. A distinctly masculine cologne clung to her, faint but unmistakable. I kept my face neutral, my voice casual. "Smells like someone at the restaurant was wearing some strong cologne. Any idea who?" She laughed, waving it off. "Oh yeah. There was this guy at the next table. Dressed like he was headed to some gala. You know how some people are." Her tone was light, playful, her answer perfectly reasonable. And yet, something about it felt scripted. She wasn't lying. Not exactly. But she wasn't telling the whole truth, either. The next morning, while Jessica was in the shower, her phone lit up on the nightstand. A missed call. An unfamiliar number. I didn't touch it. I wasn't the type to go through her phone. But I made a note of the number in my head. When she came out of the bathroom, she grabbed her phone almost immediately, slipping it into her purse with a little too much urgency. It was subtle, but I caught it. Jessica was good. She was careful. But she wasn't perfect. The pieces were there. They just hadn't come together yet. And so, I did the only thing I could do. I waited. I observed. And I prepared. Because if there was one thing I knew for certain, it was that the truth always had a way of revealing itself. The morning after Jessica's night out, something about her was different. She moved with a sense of urgency, as if she had a dozen things to do and not enough time to do them. While I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, she flitted between rooms, responding to messages on her phone, picking out clothes, and preparing for the day ahead. There was an energy to her, controlled, deliberate, but it felt overdone, like she wanted me to notice just how effortlessly composed she was. Then she stopped in the doorway, holding a neatly folded jacket over her arm. "I'm heading out to look at furniture with my sister," she said, her tone casual, but her gaze lingered on me a second too long. "She's finally getting serious about redecorating, and I don't want to let her down." I took a slow sip of my coffee, keeping my expression neutral. "If you want, I can drop you off," I offered. "I've got a light schedule today." Jessica's response came a little too quickly. "Oh, no need," she said with a polite smile. "You've got work, right? We'll manage." That was her first mistake. She knew my day was wide open, yet she framed her excuse around a busy schedule that didn't exist. It was a slip, likely unintentional, but it told me something important. She wasn't as in control of the situation as she wanted to be. I didn't push. I just nodded, letting her think she had successfully steered the conversation. There was no need to raise her defenses so early in the day. Jessica left shortly after, dressed in a fitted skirt and a tailored blouse. It wasn't flashy, but it didn't match the purpose of a casual furniture shopping trip either. Normally, she'd opt for something comfortable, leggings, sneakers, maybe a hoodie. But this outfit, along with her neatly styled hair and subtle makeup, painted a different picture. Still, I didn't follow her. That wasn't my style. If she was lying, she'd cover her tracks if she suspected I was onto her. Instead, I relied on something far more discreet, the tracking app one had installed on her phone a few weeks ago. I hadn't done it out of paranoia. Not at first. But something had shifted lately, and I needed to know if my instincts were leading me down the right path. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Jessica wasn't at a furniture store. Her location had pinged in an upscale part of town, a district known for high-end restaurants and boutique hotels. I sat there, staring at the screen, watching as the little dot remained fixed at a single address. I didn't go there myself. Not yet. Rushing in without a plan would only backfire. Instead, I waited. Let her finish whatever she was doing. Hours later, she walked through the front door, carrying a brochure from a furniture store. She casually dropped it onto the kitchen counter, the move feeling a little too deliberate, like she wanted to establish a narrative before I could ask any questions. "How was it?" I asked over dinner, keeping my tone light. "Find anything you liked?" Her answer came smoothly, as though she had rehearsed it. "Not yet." My sister had a different idea in mind, so we visited a few places. She flipped through the brochure as she spoke, pointing out random designs to back up her story. But I already knew the truth. Her phone's location had never been anywhere near a furniture store. She was lying. And while her voice remained steady, I noticed the slightest tension in her posture. Her movements were precise, controlled, but there was a sharpness to them, a quiet effort to maintain the illusion. Later, as she went upstairs to change, I noticed her purse sitting on the table. Partially tucked inside was a receipt. I slid it out just enough to read it. A restaurant. Not just any restaurant, the one in the same high-end district where her phone had been earlier. The bill was for 2 people. I didn't take the receipt. She'd notice if it was missing. Instead, I took a quick picture of it with my phone and put it back exactly as I found it. As I stared at the photo, the puzzle pieces began aligning. The polished outfit. The elaborate excuse. The fabricated story about shopping. The receipt confirmed what I already suspected. Jessica wasn't where she claimed to be. She was lying. And now I had proof. At dinner that night, I tested her story again. "You mentioned stopping by another store," I said, watching her carefully. "Were there any good discounts?" She didn't hesitate. "Oh yeah. A few, but they were mostly on older items. Nothing we liked. Smooth. Confident. But I noticed her movements became a little quicker as she tidied up the table, as if eager to move the conversation along. Her composure was impressive. But it wasn't unbreakable. That night, as she went to bed, I sat in my office, staring at the picture of the receipt on my phone. The tracking data. The inconsistencies in her story. It was all adding up to something I couldn't ignore. But I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Acting too soon would only give her a chance to twist the narrative, to cover her tracks. Instead, I waited. Jessica had been careful. But her mistakes were piling up. And she didn't realize it yet, but I had the upper hand. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. And when the moment was right, I was going to use everything I had. The past few days had been a whirlwind of subtle observations and quiet realizations. At first, I tried convincing myself that I was reading too much into things, that maybe Jessica's little inconsistencies were just that, harmless deviations from routine. But the more I watched, the clearer it became. She was careful, no doubt about that. But even the most careful person can slip. And she had. More than once. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was a chess game. One where every move mattered, and I had to stay 3 steps ahead. That afternoon, I had a work errand that brought me into the city. My job as a private chauffeur meant I spent a lot of time waiting in the background, watching the world move past from behind the wheel. I was supposed to drop my client, Mr. Larson, at a high-end restaurant for a business meeting. As I idled in the car, my thoughts were already preoccupied with Jessica, until a black car pulled up nearby and a woman stepped out. Even from a distance, I recognized her instantly. Jessica. Her posture, her walk, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, it was unmistakable. She carried a small shopping bag with a designer logo on it, her movements brisk and purposeful. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to remain still. Jumping to conclusions wouldn't help me now. I waited, giving her enough time to disappear inside the building before I stepped out. I wasn't about to barge in and make a scene, but I needed to be sure. At the hostess's desk, I asked a casual question about Mr. Larson's reservation. I was directed to a private dining area. I took a quick glance inside. No Jessica. For a brief moment, I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was getting paranoid after all. But as I walked back toward the entrance, my eyes caught something, a shopping bag identical to the one Jessica had been holding earlier. It sat beside a chair in the corner, abandoned for the moment. The boutique was one she had mentioned before, in passing. A strange coincidence. Or not. I returned to my car, my thoughts racing. Her being here didn't necessarily mean anything was wrong. But it also wasn't the furniture store she claimed to have been at. That's when I noticed something unusual under the passenger seat of Mr. Larson's car. A woman's handkerchief. I picked it up, turning it over in my fingers. It wasn't just any handkerchief. It was embroidered with delicate initials, J.B. Jessica Brown. A faint trace of her expensive perfume still lingered on the fabric. I held it in my hands for a long moment before carefully slipping it back where I found it. I wasn't ready to tip my hand yet. But now, the pieces were beginning to form a clearer picture. Could it be a coincidence? Maybe. But unlikely. Until that moment, I had never once considered the idea that Jessica's lies might be tied to someone I already knew. I had been thinking of her mystery man as a stranger, some random person she had met somewhere. But now, there was a new possibility. Larson. My boss. The man I had worked for, trusted in a professional capacity for years. A man who, now that I thought about it, had always made comments about my wife in passing. Your wife has excellent taste. She's an art enthusiast, isn't she? I'd brushed off the remark at the time, thinking nothing of it. But now, it played back in my mind with new meaning. I wasn't going to confront Larson, not yet. He was my employer, and that dynamic gave him an advantage I wasn't ready to challenge. But his smug demeanor, the way he spoke about Jessica with just a little too much familiarity, told me everything I needed to know. He thought he had the upper hand. Fine. Let him think that. That night, while Jessica slept, I crossed a line I had never crossed before. Her phone sat on the nightstand, the screen dark. I picked it up. Her passcode hadn't changed. Our wedding date. A cruel irony, really. I unlocked it, my hands steady, my mind already preparing for what I might find. At first, everything looked normal. But then, I found a message thread with someone named Michelle. I hesitated. Michelle wasn't someone Jessica had ever mentioned before. I opened the thread. At first glance, the messages seemed harmless. But then I saw the ones that mattered. Everything's ready. He hasn't suspected a thing. Friday. Same plan. Same place. There was no explicit mention of a person. No direct confessions. But the meaning was clear. This wasn't a conversation between friends making casual plans. This was something else entirely. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to my own phone before carefully placing hers back on the nightstand. The following morning, as Jessica got ready for the day, she picked up her phone a little too quickly. She checked the screen, scrolling through her messages with an urgency she tried to hide. Her body language was different. She knew something had changed. She didn't say a word about it. Neither did I. But in that silence, an unspoken truth settled between us. She knew she was being watched. And I knew she was preparing her next move. We weren't just husband and wife anymore. We were opponents in a game neither of us had acknowledged aloud. But I wasn't worried. Because unlike Jessica, I played the long game. And she had already made too many mistakes. She just didn't realize it yet. The morning started the same as always, but my mind was far from routine. The puzzle pieces had finally locked into place. Jessica wasn't just lying, she was living a double life. And now, the only thing left to figure out was just how far it went. I wasn't interested in vague suspicions anymore. I wanted proof. Hard, undeniable proof. And the opportunity to get it came sooner than I expected. That afternoon, I was assigned to drive Larson to an exclusive country club for a business meeting. The drive was uneventful, at least until Larson decided to break the silence with a comment that immediately set my teeth on edge. "You know, Nick," he said, his voice casual, but with a deliberate edge. "Your wife is an extraordinary woman." His eyes flicked to me in the rearview mirror, a smirk tugging at his lips. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter but kept my tone neutral. "Yeah, I know." Larson chuckled, like he found something about this whole situation amusing. "Women like her deserve attention. You're a lucky man. I assume you support her in everything she does." I forced my expression to stay unreadable. He wasn't just talking. He was testing me. I didn't take the bait. "I try," I said simply, keeping my voice even. He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and turned his attention back to his phone. But I heard everything he wasn't saying. He thought he had won. That I was just some oblivious husband, clueless to what was happening right under my nose. Let him think that. Once I dropped Larson off, I seized my chance. While he was inside, I searched his car with methodical precision. And in the glove compartment, I found exactly what I was looking for. A receipt. Not just any receipt. A purchase from a high-end jewelry store. The date of purchase. Just a few days ago. And the item listed? A luxury watch with a personalized engraving. For J. There was no doubt in my mind who J was. Jessica. I snapped a photo of the receipt before carefully putting it back where I found it. My anger simmered beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay focused. Acting on emotion would only make me sloppy. That evening, my determination only grew. Jessica had been cautious, but her every move was now under scrutiny. And when I tried to check her phone later that night, I discovered something new. She had changed her passcode. A small detail, but an important one. She knew I was watching. Instead of feeling deterred, I felt something else. Resolution. Jessica had spent weeks, maybe months, thinking she was in control. But she had no idea that the power dynamic had shifted. That night, I told her I'd be working late. An easy excuse. Something she wouldn't question. Instead of heading to work, I parked near an upscale hotel. A hotel address I had seen in some of Larson's documents. I wasn't guessing. I was calculating. And I was right. The moment I walked into the lobby, I spotted them. Jessica stood near the entrance, holding a bag with the same jewelry store logo from the receipt. She was dressed to perfection, her hair styled, her body language relaxed. And standing beside her, too close to be anything but intimate, was Larson. My jaw tightened as I watched them. There was no ambiguity in their body language. No way to misinterpret what was happening. They weren't trying to hide. Not from anyone but me. I didn't approach them. That wasn't my style. And it wouldn't have served my purpose. Instead, I pulled out my phone. And I took the pictures. Not just one. Several. Jessica and Larson laughing. Jessica holding his arm. Jessica looking up at him with the same expression she used to give me. As they moved toward the elevators, I stayed back, watching as the doors closed behind them. My heart pounded, but not from pain. From anger. Raw, controlled, seething anger. When I returned home that night, the house was quiet. Jessica was already in bed, lying peacefully, as if nothing had happened. For a brief second, I just stood there, staring at her. She had no idea. She thought she had me fooled. That she had control of the narrative. But she was wrong. The game was over. She just didn't know it yet. I walked into my office, powered up my laptop, and began organizing everything I had gathered. The photos. The screenshots. The receipts. Every lie, every betrayal, carefully documented. By the time I was done, I knew exactly what needed to happen next. Jessica thought she had been playing me. But she had no idea. I was about to play her. And I was going to win. The morning after I caught Jessica and Larson at the hotel, I felt nothing but cold, unshakable clarity. The evidence was undeniable now. The text messages, the tracking data, the receipts, and the photos, each one a nail in the coffin of her lies. She had underestimated me, thinking she could play her game forever without consequences. She was wrong. And now, I was going to make sure she paid for it. I wasted no time. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with a divorce attorney. I wasn't going to confront her emotionally or let this become a drawn-out battle of accusations and half-truths. This was about strategy, control, and ensuring she walked away with nothing. The attorney listened carefully as I laid out my case. I didn't just have suspicions, I had hard proof. I have an ace up my sleeve, I told him. Larson talks too much when he's in my car. If I document those conversations, I can use them. The attorney raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. If you can get something substantial, it could be pivotal, he said. Just be careful. Make sure you stay within legal boundaries. I nodded. I already had a plan. For years, Larson had run his mouth about his business deals, treating me like part of the scenery as he boasted about tax loopholes, offshore accounts, and shady partnerships. He thought I was just the silent chauffeur, someone who faded into the background. That was his mistake. Back home, I began compiling every detail I could remember. Names, dates, key phrases, anything that might lead to real, actionable evidence. And then, a memory surfaced. Larson once laughed about funneling money through a shell company in his brother's name. Easiest way to hide assets, he had said, completely oblivious to the fact that I was paying attention. At the time, I thought it was just rich man bragging. Now, I realized it was something more. I reached out to someone who might help, a former associate of Larson's, a man who had left the company on bad terms. He was still bitter, still angry at how things had ended. So when I brought up Larson's shady dealings, he didn't hold back. He always works through intermediaries, the man said. Never signs anything himself. But he keeps notes, a notebook he carries everywhere. That was the break I needed. The next time I drove Larson, I seized my chance. While he was inside a meeting, I searched his car again, but this time, I found something even better. A stack of old documents carelessly stuffed into the glove compartment. I flipped through them quickly, my heart pounding. Bank transfer records. Offshore accounts. Money moving in and out of suspicious businesses. I took photos of everything before carefully returning them to their place. Back at home, I studied the images in detail. This wasn't just financial misconduct. This was the kind of thing that could ruin him. I needed verification from a more reliable source, so I hired a private investigator, a man known for his discretion and results. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. If there was more dirt to be found on Larson, I wanted it. And a few days later, the investigator delivered. "Your boss is laundering money through shell companies," he told me. "Some of these transactions, if the authorities got their hands on them, he'd be looking at serious charges." I stared at the report in my hands. Larson thought he was untouchable. But now, I had the power to destroy him. I wasn't just going to expose him. I was going to bury him. The best part? Jessica had tied herself to a sinking ship. And when he went down, he was going to take her with him. That evening, Jessica walked through the door like nothing had changed. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, acting like she was the same loving wife she had always been. Like she hadn't been sleeping with another man. Like she wasn't plotting behind my back. But I had stopped seeing her as my wife a long time ago. Now, she was just another opponent. And I had already beaten her. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, planning my next move. The divorce papers were ready. The evidence against Larson was airtight. All that was left was execution. And when the moment was right, I was going to burn their whole world to the ground. The day had finally come. Jessica still had no idea. She thought she was in control, that her carefully constructed lies were holding up. But the truth was, she had already lost. She just didn't know it yet. That morning, I sat in my car outside the courthouse, the divorce papers resting on the passenger seat. I had wasted no time. There was no need for drawn-out fights or emotional breakdowns. I had the upper hand, and I intended to use it. Before heading in, I made one last call. Not to Jessica. To the authorities. It was time for Larson's empire to fall. By the time I stepped into the attorney's office, everything was already in motion. The financial records, the investigators' findings, the offshore accounts, I had turned it all over to the right people. Within hours, law enforcement would be knocking on Larson's door. And when he went down, Jessica would go with him. She had tied herself to the wrong man. Now, she'd have to live with the consequences. That evening, Jessica came home to find me sitting at the kitchen table, divorce papers laid out neatly in front of me. Her eyes darted to them, confusion flashing across her face before she masked it with practiced indifference. "What's this?" she asked, her voice controlled. I leaned back in my chair, my expression unreadable. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said. "We're done." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're joking." I didn't say anything. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her composure. Her fingers twitched as she grabbed the papers, scanning them. "You don't get to decide this, Nick," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I interrupted, my tone final. "I know everything, Jessica. The night's out. The lies. Larson." Her face paled. I didn't give her a chance to recover. "I know where you've been. I know what you've been doing. I have the receipts, the messages, the photos." I leaned forward, watching her carefully. "And you're going to sign those papers, Jessica. Because if you don't, I'll make sure you lose more than just this marriage." She swallowed hard, trying to regain her footing. "You're threatening me?" I gave her a cold smile. "I don't have to threaten you. I'm giving you a way out." Her breath hitched, her eyes flicking to the door as if she was considering running. She had always been confident, always so sure of herself. But now, she looked like a woman who had just realized she had bet on the wrong side. I stood, pushing the pen toward her. "Sign the papers, Jessica." For the first time since this all started, she hesitated. And then, slowly, she picked up the pen. She signed. And just like that, it was over. For her, at least. For Larson, it was just beginning. The fallout was immediate. Within days, Larson's empire crumbled. The authorities raided his office, uncovering the full extent of his fraudulent dealings. Every shady business move, every offshore account, it was all exposed. He was finished. And Jessica? She tried to salvage what she could. She reached out, tried to spin a new story, but it was too late. She had lost everything. Her reputation. Her security. Her carefully built facade. Gone. One night, she showed up outside my house, her face pale, her eyes desperate. "We need to talk," she said, her voice raw. "Please." I stood in the doorway, looking at the woman I had once loved. The woman who had betrayed me. "There's nothing left to say," I told her. "You made your choice." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. She had destroyed us. Now she had to live with it. She left without another word. And just like that, she was gone. In the end, I didn't feel triumph. No satisfaction. Just peace. The house felt different. Quieter. Lighter. I went through every room, removing every trace of her. The old pictures, the forgotten trinkets, the ghosts of what we used to be. It was painful. But it was necessary. Jessica had spent months, maybe years, thinking she could play me. Thinking she could control the story. But in the end, she was just another liar who had underestimated the wrong man. I wasn't broken. I wasn't bitter. I was free. And that was all that mattered. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.